Welcome. Today we're going to be taking a look at how we can make it so we can add items to a list and store it inside our device and use it across the entire application. In order to do that, we have to do a couple different things we haven't done before. So we're starting off actually in App.swift, the file we normally don't even touch when we're looking inside our applications. The first thing we have to do is we have to make it so we have a source of truth that the app can reference across the entire application, and we do this by loading an environment object. To do so, first thing we need to do is we need to create a state object of the data store we're working with. And so we already had our data store working with in an earlier video, so you can take a look at how we're doing that now. But we're going to move that over here, and we're going to move that data store, instead of being in the data view, we're going to move the data store initialization to happen inside the App.swift file. We do this a little bit differently. We make a state object property wrapper. This is one that can make a source of truth for us object that we can reference across multiple screens, just like we're doing right here. And it's a private var because, of course, no one else gets to change this variable besides the app that owns it. And then it's stored buckets, the creative name I'm using, which is of type bucket data store. And then I assign into it the bucket data store, passing initialization of buckets using the load JSON, passing the string of the JSON file, and I downcast that to be a bucket list item list so I can appropriately use it. Okay, we've already done that inside our data app. We're good to go. What's different as well is I then attach that environment object right here to the data view by doing .environmentObject inside the initialization inside the window group. And so that says, oh, stored buckets, you are now an environment object. And so iOS will now look for this whenever I try and reference an environment object of type bucket data store. And so I have now this object I can reference indirectly across multiple views. And no matter how deep I get, I can reference this inside my view. And since we have a couple different views on this, we want to have it so I don't have to have it passed as a parameter for every single thing we're doing. Instead, by loading it as an environment object, I can simply use the @environmentObject property wrapper to retrieve that from the environment. And it makes life so much better. So that's what we have to do first. The next thing we're going to do is look at the AddBucketListItemView, where we're going to be actually creating the items we can put back inside the project. So I'm going inside my bucket list view section, grab my item list view right here. And so right here we have the actual structure itself that we have to work with. As you can see, it's just a regular Swift UI view we're starting off with. And we have 4 data members we're going to be working with specifically. The first one is the new @environment, passing it the \dismiss, which is the iOS way we can actually dismiss screens programmatically. And I give it the really creative var name of dismiss. We have an environment object we just talked about, which is referencing that environment object of the data store. And so I'm using still the same name of stored buckets because, hey, it's easy to remember. And it is of type bucket data store. We have 2 state variables that reference the 2 components we're going to be modifying inside this list item. And so I have a state var for author, which is a string, and I assign it the default value of blank. And I have a nat state var bucket list item, which is also a string, and again, the empty string. And I use this empty string on purpose because it helps us so we can have a conditional evaluation whether or not we need a button for this. We're going to put inside our preview, we're going to add a reference to the environment object, so our preview will work as well. So inside my preview, I'm going to do a .environmentObject so I can reference it so it'll allow it to use that environment object up here in our data member section. And then I do bucket data store initialization just like we did inside our data view earlier, as well as what we did inside our app.swift, because that way it can load it for the preview purposes, makes it so I can access it. So that's the second thing we need to do after we've created our data members. Once we've got our data members done and that preview done, then we want to go ahead and make the function we're going to use to actually go through and do this. We have a private function called addBucketItemToDataStore, which is of type void. And so inside here, we're going to get the year. We're going to make a new bucket list item, and we're going to then put it inside the buckets and then dismiss the screen. So the year, we just do that by doing calendar.current, calling the component of that, and we get the year from the current date. So it just gets us the year value out of that, and it's an int. Great, wonderful. I then create a new bucket list item, passing it the year, the bucket list item variable, and the author variable that we have defined up here in our data member section, because I can just retrieve those values from there and put them inside that instance. I'm using storedbuckets.buckets.insert @0, so I make sure I put it at the front of the list. So whenever I add an item, I will see it right there as soon as I go back to my data view because, oh, it's at the top and I can easily see it. Makes life amazing and easy to do. So that's why we're doing that. And then finally we use the we just call dismiss, which references that environment variable of dismiss. That wipes this current view off the screen and makes it so we can go back to wherever we were before. Wonderful feature. I love it. It's a great way to do new stuff inside Swift. Once we've made that method, the next step we need to do is we need to go ahead and actually put together the components for this to make it so we have a form. And so inside our body, we make a form block. And I put a section here just so I can make it like separate it out. And inside that section, I put a input field, which we've made earlier. You can take a look at the video on how to make those as well. It's an easy way to make it so you can do that. You could also just use plain text fields, but I like the input field. It does some cool stuff. And so my input field, I have a creature, and I have that bound to the value of author. I have another input field with the goal, and I bound that to the bucket list item, so those tie those values back up to the data members right here. And then as long as the user has typed a value into both the author and the bucket list item fields, we'll then load up a button in there, which will then call that method of add the item to the bucket store, and then it will cause it to then, of course, dismiss the screen when we're done. So it's a great way we can do that. Then the next thing we have to do is just go ahead and go to DataView and actually load this inside the screen. So in our data view, the first thing we have to do is we have to change our observed object to an environment object because it's no longer a initialized value inside our data view. And so we just change addObservedObject to addEnvironmentObject, and I remove the initialization sequence after the data member declaration. Oh, that's easy peasy. The next step we're going to go ahead and do is down here in our previews, we'll do that same thing we just did in the AddBucketListItem preview, where I do the environment object and I initialize it so I have access to it here in the previews, so it'll work there as well. So those are the first two things that I need to do. Next thing I need to do is I need to add another data member. We need to add a state variable so we can talk about the reference of whether we want to add the screen or not. So it's a @state private var showAddBucketListItem. It's of type bool, and we want to give it a default value of false because we don't want to pass this as a parameter when we create the value. So we give it a default value, and we want it to be false anyway. So that's why we do it with that. So that's the variable we add for that to make that work. And we're going to go inside our body. And inside the list modifiers I've got right here, I'm going to add a navigationTitle, data and information. It gives us this lovely title right here so we can get that in there. And then we'll add a ToolBarItem. We put an edit button. And that makes it so we can do the same thing we were doing where we can swipe to delete as ready. But just by putting an edit button, it makes it so it's really easy to do. And that's just by adding a ToolBarItem and having the .navigation bar leading placement, so it puts it up here in the top left. And then what we also want to do is we want to have the ToolBarItem for navigation bar trailing, and we do a different type of button here. So I'm making a button, and I pass it the action of self.showAddBucketListItem.toggle. And .toggle is this amazing feature. It takes true values, turns them false, or false values, and turns them true. It's great. Okay, so whenever I click the button, it's going to turn it true or false. Great. And then my image is systemname, passing it systemname plus, and it gives this cute little plus sign image we can automatically load inside there. The last bit we have to do is we have the .sheet is presented, and we pass it the bound reference of the showAddBucketListItem. So we're going to talk about that Boolean variable again one more time, and so it presents itself if it's true. And when we do, we'll call the AddBucketListItem the AddBucketListItemView, which will then make it so it pops up. We can see this right here inside the preview. I click the plus sign. I can make a new bucket list item, and I type right here, blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. And now it allows the button to exist, so I can click it, add it to the data store, and it disappears, and it puts it right up here, right here inside the window for us, and it's available, and I can click on it and go to it, and there's my lovely keyboard mashing for what we just did. And so I can go back to data information, it's right there, it has my lovely title window, everything looks amazing, and again, all we had to do for that is we had to go ahead and make an environment object by putting that inside App.swift. So in our App.swift, we make that as a state object, we attach it as an environment object. We then created the AddBucketListItemView, which is a view that has a form in it that supports the ability to add those in. They just grab those values out of that, and we have the conditional evaluation of that button right there, so we can make that happen. After we make our AddBucketListItemView, we then just go ahead and go back to our data view, and inside our data view, we go ahead and we reference it up here with an addEnvironmentObject preview. We have the data member for showAddBucketListItem, and we have our preview that we modify as well. And then we have that sheet is presented, which puts it inside there, and the appropriate toolbar modifications so that it can actually work. I hope this is a helpful way that you can make it so you can add items to a list, and this can help you do cool projects. Thanks again for coming, and have a great day. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.